Forms have become much easier to build in the last couple of years with libraries like React Hook Form that are going to manage your form state for you. But forms still have one big problem, and that's that you have to write a lot of markup. In this video, we're going to be creating a React component that takes some configuration, and then based on that configuration, it's going to output a form for you. I've built a version of this component for my day job, and I've managed to make several pull requests that each remove several thousand lines of code. So let's get started and take a look at what it is that we're going to be building. So we're going to be building a library to generate forms given some config, and we're going to take a look at what that config is inside of our story here. We're going to include just a few fields in this form. We're going to have text fields, number fields, arrays, and objects. And you're even going to be able to have arrays of objects. So what we learn, you're going to learn some really cool TypeScript tricks. You're going to learn how to use React Hook Form, including field arrays. And you're going to learn about nested fields and arrays in forms. So I'm going to come over to the story here, and you're going to be able to see an example of what it is that we're going to be building. So we have this object here called fields, and we've typed out fields here. So we have one field here called email, and this is just going to be a text field. We're going to have a little label here. We're going to have a count field, and our count is going to be a number. If we change count here to text, you can see that min is no longer a valid input here. So we can remove those, and you can see that we get no type checking for those. If we change this back to number, you can see that TypeScript now prompts us that we might want to use min here. And we can also use max. We have an array field here, and you might notice that this looks a lot like JSON schema. So inside of our array, we're just going to have a text field. We have an object here, and objects are used for nested properties. So we're going to have object, and then inside of object, we're going to have subprop1. So the output of this is going to be object.subprop1 equals your value here. Next, we have a key value pair, and this is going to be an array of objects. So you can see here, our object includes a key and a value, and this might be used for something like headers inside a HTTP request, where you might have your content type, and then you have your value down here. When we submit the form, we're just going to console log the data. So let's go over to Storybook and have a look at what this form looks like. So I'm here in Storybook, and you might be thinking this form is ugly, and you'd be absolutely right. I'm not going to style this form, and the reason that I'm not going to style it is because you need to adapt this to whatever component library or CSS framework that you're using. So for example, if you're using Mentine UI, then you need to create your text inputs using Mentine UI. If you're using Tailwinds, then you want to pass some classes down through props, and you want to supply some default classes on these inputs here. I don't want to make any assumptions about what your application is using. So we can fill in this form here. I'm just going to say t@t.com, and let's open the console. I can create a count here. I can add an item to my array. So this is going to be item on array. And Storybook is giving us some errors here, so I'm just going to filter those out. Next, we can add something to our subprop. So subprop value. And you can see how fast this form is, and that's thanks to React Hook Form, which we're going to be using in the background. So our key here could be something like content type. And then the value could be something like JSON. Let's submit this. And I think we have a min and max. So let's change our max to 100 here. And I'll fill this in again. Let's submit this form. And you can see that we have our array here. We have our count, we have our email, and we have our key value pair. And this is going to be an array of objects. On our array, you can add more items to the array, and then you can also remove items from the array. So we can submit this, and we can see that our key value pair now just includes an empty array of these default values here. So let's get started building this form generator. So I'm here in a new terminal, and I'm going to type npx tsdx and create, and then I'm going to call my library formGen library. tsdx is going to ask us if we want to create a basic app, a React app, but we want a React app with Storybook. So scroll down to that and press enter. And TSDX is going to take a little while here to create your library. So once TSDX has finished creating your library, I'm going to cd into form gen library, and then I'm going to open this up in a new VS Code window. So the first thing we want to look at is inside of source here, we have our index.tsx, and this is the entry point into your library. So anything that you export here will be able to import when you use your library. So I'm going to remove everything from there. And then if we go over to stories, you can see we have this story called thing.stories. Let's rename this, and we're just going to use this for our form. You can see that we're trying to import thing and props. Let's remove those. We no longer have those. We can remove thing. I'm just going to remove the props here, and then we can save that. It's going to break our story, but that's okay. So inside of source, I want to create a new file, and I want to call this form.tsx. Then I want to export function form. And then inside of form, I'm just going to return, and I'm going to return a form. And then inside of form, I'm just going to say hello. We need to import React from React. And then again, inside of source, I'm going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call this types.ts. And inside of types.ts, we're going to put all of our types. So I just want to export one interface from here for now, and then I'm going to call this form props. Now we can go back into index, and we can say export from /form, and I want to export a component called form. So now that we're exporting form, we can do the same with our form props. So I'm going to import these from types and form props. Okay, so now we can go back to our story, and we can import our form, and we can import our form props. And I want to use my form in this component. I'm also going to rename this to form, and I want to use my form props down here. And then I want to render my form. So the first thing I want to do is to get just a simple text field working. So let's come back to our types, and above where we export our form props here, I'm going to create a type called field schema. And these are going to be all the types that we're going to allow. So I can say type field schema is equal to, and this is going to be an object with a type, and this is going to be a union of text or number or array or object. Okay, so next we want some default props. So I'm going to say type defaults props is equal to an object, and these are just going to be props that all of our fields have. So the first one is going to be a label, and this is going to be a string. My label is going to be required. Then I'm going to have a placeholder, and then this is going to be an optional string. Okay, so now I want to export a type for our text field. So I'm going to say export type text field props is equal to, and I want to extend field schema, and I want to extend my default props, and then this is just going to be an object. So I need to say end object. Now there's one property that we have to put on here, and this is going to be our type, and our type has to be text. You may be wondering why I'm using type here instead of an interface. The reason is because I just prefer this and syntax instead of the implements or extends syntax, whatever interfaces use. So the next type I want is going to be a field. So I'm going to say export type field. And for now, this is just going to be equal to our text field props. And text field props should have an uppercase. But we're going to make this a union later on of our number field and our array field and our object field props. Next, I want to create a type for field. So type fields is equal to a record. And then the record is going to have a string as the key. And then the value is going to be the field. So this string is going to be our field's name. And then the field is just going to be the props that that field takes. So now in our form props, we can say fields, and then this is going to be equal to our fields here. Let's create a type now for our onSubmit handler. So onSubmit, And to do this first, we need to actually install React Hook Form. So let's do that. Yarn add React Hook Form. And then our onSubmit is going to be a submit handler. And it looks like VS Code is not importing this. So import from React Hook Form. And we want to get our submit handler. And we want to get our fields values as well. Now we can use submit handler. And then this is generic. That's just going to take our field values here. Okay, so let's go back to our story. And I want to say const fields is equal to an object, and then I can type this out. So this is going to be form props. And then I want to get the fields. So I'm going to have one field here called email. And I should get a type. And the only type I can select now is text. I should be able to put a label on here, and then I can give it a label of email. Okay, so now I can use my fields here. And I just want to say on submit as well. And I just want to give this a callback. Take my values. And I can say console.log values. And I'm just going to log my values out here. So let's go over to our form here. And we can take an argument of props here. So the first one is going to be our fields. And then on submit, so we can type this out as our fields. So this is going to be our form props. So the first thing I want to do is to wrap my form inside of a form provider that comes from React Hook Form. And this means that we can use that context later on in our other components, like a text field component. That's going to make a little bit more sense later on. So let's say form provider. And this comes from React Hook Form. Let's close that out. So now form provider needs to take our form values. So let's say const form is equal to use form. And we can go down here and we can create an object and we can spread our form on, and our form provider is happy. Our form here can take an onSubmit handler. And then this is going to call form.handleSubmit. And then we can just call this with onSubmit. So let's remove hello, and we can add a button here. And this is just going to be normal HTML button. I'm going to say save. And then the type of this button is going to be submit. So for now, let's just json.stringify our fields here and say yarn storybook. The reason we get storybook is because TSDX has added it for us. So you can see here, we get our button, and then we just get some config here. So up above our form, let's create a function called render fields. And then inside of our form here, I'm just going to remove our JSON stringifier. And I'm going to say object.entries fields.map. And then inside of the map, I'm just going to call render fields. Let's see what this returns. So I can say data, let's call this props. And I can just return a div that says render fields. And I also want to JSON.stringify. And actually, let's remove that. Let's go back to our form. And you can see here, we get an array. And this is our key. So this is what our property is called. And then we get an object here of configuration. So let's go type this out. So I can say props here is going to be an array. We're going to get our name, and then we're going to get our fields props. So our name is going to be a string. And then our field here is going to be a field, and this comes from your types here. Okay, so let's return here a div that says unknown type, and then we can say fields props dot type, but we can do some testing here. So we can say if field props dot type is equal to text, then we want to return a text field. So let's create that now. So I'm going to create a new component here. Actually, I'm going to create a new folder called components. I'm going to create a new file called text field.tsx. Inside of text field, I'm going to say function text field, and then export defaults text field. Let's get some props in here. This is going to be our text fields props. And we're also going to have an object here. This is going to have a name of the field, and that's just going to be a string. Let's return a div. And I'm just going to wrap this in a div because you're going to want to attach some classes here or use some sort of wrapper. We need to import React. So let's have a label. In my schema, labels are required. So I'm going to say props.label. Actually, let's destructure this. Const an object is equal to props. And then I'm going to get out the label. I'm going to get out the name. And I think that's all we need for now. So we can say label. Next, we can say input. And the type is going to be text. Let's add this actually as a prop. So I'm going to come back to types. And inside of text field here, I'm going to say HTML type. And then this is going to be an optional string. Let's see if there is a type here. HTML input type attribute. Let's see what is on here. Okay, so we have button, number, search, tell time. Okay, I think, yeah, this is what we want. And then is there text here? We can just default this to text. Okay, that's good. So now we can say in our form, in our text field, sorry, we can say the type is going to be equal to field props. Sorry, we can get the HTML type here. And then we can say our type is equal to the HTML type. And then we can just default this to text. Let's give our label an HTML4 attribute. And the HTML4 is going to be our name. And then we can give our input an ID. And the ID is going to be name. Let's also give this a placeholder. And the placeholder is just going to be our props.placeholder. So let's destructure that. So this is all well and good, but we need to register this component. So to do that, we need to use the register function that comes with React Hook form. So you'll see here we get form.register. So we could just pass that down through render fields into the component, but that's quite annoying and we don't really want to do that. So because we wrapped our form inside of a form provider, we can use context here. So I can say const is equal to use form context. And now we can get our register function. Now we can use this on our input. So I'm going to create some objects, spread register, and then I just want to register with our name. So let's go use this now inside of form. So if we're a text, then we're going to return text field. And we want to spread on our field props. And we want to say name is equal to name. Let's go back to Storybook and you can see that we get our label here and we get our input. Let's click save and it's working already. So let's create a number field. If you don't need the min and max, then you don't need to create a new field from here. You could just pass in the HTML type as number here, and that would work perfectly fine. I don't want to do that. And the reason is I just want to show that you can have different props for different form element types. So let's come back to our types.ts and I'm just going to copy text field props and I'm going to call this number. I'm going to change the type here to number. Now I want to remove HTML type. It's always going to be type number. I'm going to say min is an optional number and then max is also an optional number. So now we need to make our field a union of text field props or number field props, and we should be good to go. Let's go back to our storybook. Copy email. I'm going to call this count and change the type to number. And then the label is just going to be count. We have a look and it says unknown type number. So let's go copy our text field here. And I'm going to call this number field. We can rename this here to number field. We can remove our HTML type. We don't want that. And the type here is just always going to be number. Now let's go back to our form and we can test for this. So I can say if the form props.type is equal to number, then I want to render our number field. Let's go back and you can see we have count here and this is a number. Okay, so let's go add our object field. So I'm going to start with the types because this is going to make everything else much easier. So I'm just going to copy number field props here and I'm going to call this object. I'm going to change the type here to object, remove min and max. And for an object, we're going to have properties and properties is going to be equal to fields. So if we go have a look at what fields is a record where we have our property name and then we have a field. So our property name here is going to be our sub property name. Go back to our storybook and I'm going to create a new property here called my_obj. And change the type to, we don't have object type there. So let's go back to types and you can see here field needs to be a union of object field as well. Let's go back and see if we can use this now. And we have object appearing. So we require our properties in here. And then our property is going to be my sub object. Now we need a type here. And the type can be either number, object, or text. We need a label. And this is going to be my sub property. Go back to storybook and again we get unknown type object. So let's go create a field for object. So I'm going to create my object field inside of my form here. So function object field. The reason I'm going to do that is because I want to call render fields here. So we have a little bit of recursion going on. This is going to be props and we're going to get our object field props. And again, we're going to get name, which is going to be a string. I'm going to say const, and I'm just going to destructure from props here. And I want to destructure out our label, our name, and our properties. Return, and I'm going to turn a div again. I want to render out my label. Now I want to do something very similar to what we did down inside of our form here. So I'm going to copy this actually. And instead of fields here, I'm going to have my properties. And instead of just calling render fields, I'm going to have a function that returns render fields. And we're going to get an array here. This is going to be our field name. And then we're also going to get our object field. So render here takes an array. The first argument is going to be the name. So we need to make a concatenation of this name plus our field name. So this name up here, if we go back to our story, is going to be my obj. And then the field name inside of the array is going to be my sub object. You could have multiple sub objects here, and that's why we need to call object.entries. So let's open up some strings here. And we can say name dot. And then we also want our field name. And then we also just want to pass in our object field. Okay, so let's go use object field. So I can just copy this down. If form props.type is equal to object, then I want to call object field. Let's go back and have a look, and you can see that we have my sub property here, and this looks like a number. Let's go back to our story, and you can see the type here is actually number. Let's change this to text, And let's say its HTML type is going to be an email. So now when we save this and I'll put in a valid email, and you can see that it needs some @ symbols, and the browser is going to do some validation for you. So that's an object complete. Now let's move on to the final part where we create an array, and this is where your form is going to get really dynamic. So as always, let's start with the types. I'm going to copy down my object field props. I'm going to call this array field props. My type here is going to be array. Instead of properties, I'm going to call this item field. And then this is just going to be a single field. Let's add this onto our field union here. Let's go make our story. So our stories in this case are sort of working like tests. We make them fail and then we write some code so they pass. So I'm going to say my array, and then the type is going to be array. The label is going to be my array. The fields is going to be an object. So I'm going to have a type here, and this is just going to be a text. And then I'm going to have a label, and this is going to say array text. Let's add another array. And I'm going to do the same as we did before. So I'm going to have a key value pair. So I'm going to make the label headers. The type here is going to be an object. And then an object has properties. And in this property, we're going to have a key, which is going to be a type of text. It's going to have a label of key. Then we're also going to have a value. And the label is going to be value. So let's get headers or header fields, just so it looks different. And you can see here we have two unknown field type array. Let's go implement our array. So just below object field, I'm going to say function array field. Again, I'm going to do this inside a form because we do need to call render fields here. We're going to get our props, and we're going to get our array field props. And we're also going to have a name, and our name is going to be a string. Instead of array, I'm going to destructure. So I'm going to say const is equal to props. I want to destructure my name, my item field, and the label. So the next thing we want to do is to get our form context. So I'm going to say const is equal to use form context. And I just want to get out control. And I'm going to use control to create a field array. So field arrays come from React Hook Form, and this is one of its best features because it makes something that's otherwise really complicated really easy to use. So I'm going to say const is equal to use fields array, and we're going to get a few methods from here. So we're going to get fields, then we're going to get append, and we're also going to get remove. So use field array takes a couple of arguments. One, we need to pass in control. And then the next one is going to be our name. So down here, let's return. I'm going to return our empty div. Inside of our empty div, I'm going to have a button. This is going to have a plus symbol. Then I'm going to call fields.map. I'm going to get my item and my index, and I'm going to return a div. Inside of my div, I don't think React is happy with that. So inside my div, I'm going to have render fields. And then we need to do what we did up here with our name. So I'm going to have an array here, and then I'm going to have my name. But this time I want to use some array brackets here, and I just need to pass in the index. And this needs to be the actual index variable. Next, we just need to pass in our item field. And because we're mapping over these, we need to have a key. So I'm going to say key is equal to, and I'm going to say array field. And then I'm going to pass in a name. And then I'm going to pass in our index as well. And we actually don't need the index. We should get an item.id. And this is going to be much more reliable than our index here. Okay, so for our plus button here, we have a couple of tricky things. One, our field array could be anything. It could be an object, it could be a text field, it could be a number field. So we need to create some defaults here. So I'm going to say const append defaults is equal to an object. And then for text fields, I just want to add an empty string. For number, I want to add a 0. For array, I just want to add an empty array. For object, I just want to add an empty object. Let's declare a function add. Now when we call add, I want to call append, and I want to call append with our append defaults. And then I want to grab our type out of here. So we can destructure type, and then we can grab our type. So if our type is text, then we're going to append this empty string here. If our type is number, then we're going to append this number and so on. Okay, so in our button, let's say on click, and I want to call add. We don't need the brackets here. We're going to have one little problem here, but I'm going to show you what that problem is, and then we're going to go fix it. So let's use this, and then we can go fix that problem and implement our remove button here. Let's copy down this here, and we can say if array, then we can render our array field. And we're going to remove this because TypeScript is going to complain because we're catching everything here. So we have a plus button here, but when we click the plus button, it submits our form. You can see in the console down here that it's submitting our form. We don't want that to happen. So to fix this, and this is kind of a weird fix, we need to say the type here is equal to button. Now if we come back and we click plus, so when we click plus, it does nothing. And that's because I've made a little mistake here. Instead of type, it's actually our item field dot type. And we need to use our label. So let's do that really quickly. Pass in our label in here. And TypeScript is complaining here, and it says here that text does not exist. If we go up, you can see that I've written type instead of text. So let's change that. And now TypeScript is happy. Let's go try this again. And you can see that we can now append to both of our arrays. Let's go implement this remove button. And this is really simple. Inside of our div here, we want to have another button. And then this button, I'm just going to have a minus symbol. I'm going to make the type here equal to button. And then on click is going to be a function. And this function is going to call remove. And we just need to call remove with the index. Let's go try this out. We get a button, and then we can remove it here. So let's fill in our form and make sure everything is working as we expect. So it's going to be a header, and then this is going to be the value. And this is going to be a subprop. And our subprop here actually needs to be an email, so t@t.com. Click save. And we can inspect our values here. So we have our key values, our header, our value, and then we have my array, and then we have my object and a sub property here that is an email. So that is how to build a form library. You could publish this as an NPM module and share it around your applications, or you could publish it as an open source library. If you create a version of this library, let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to see what you've done with it. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you leave a thumbs up and subscribe so you get notified whenever I release new videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.